Latest update on the UPS fiery crash and what MD-11 pilots are saying about the footage. The NTSB has located the black boxes, but in what condition? Also, many people are comparing this with the American Airlines Flight 191 crash decades ago. Let's find out why on Taking Off. Hi, I'm Dan Milliken, and we're going to go over the latest updates and find out what clues that the MD-11 pilots are looking at and what we know about the horrible crash on November 4th of the UPS MD-11. And this was just simply heartbreaking, not only for the flight crew on the stricken airplane, but all the people unaware, doing their jobs in the buildings along the fiery path. And we'll talk about the plane and why people are calling up memories of American Airlines 191 crash in Chicago. The videos are horrendous and all over social media. Check out just the weather radar of that area shortly after the crash. That's smoke, not rain, around the airport. The videos are horrendous and all over social media. And our team here is sifting through everything, and we're finding a new wrinkle in our process. Now we take a look at every picture, every video, and wonder if it's AI generated or AI enhanced. And instead of a binary conclusion on the stuff that we're seeing and hearing, this one's fake, this one's real, I think I'll treat all this media gathering like the intelligence industry treats incoming traffic, with a confidence meter. Everything these days is suspect, but I'm only going to show you things our team has a high confidence in. Let's go over the facts as they sit roughly 24 hours after this horrendous crash. UPS Flight 2976, as you just heard, was flying to Honolulu. There was some event for the number one, or left engine, which caught fire and departed the plane. The MD-11 only achieved maybe 100 feet of altitude. Other surveillance videos show it rolling left as it impacted several businesses adjacent to the airport, but not on the airport itself. The airplane was most likely near gross weight. Again, that's pretty much topped off for the MD-11. There were 3 crew members on board, and there are casualties on the ground. At the time of writing this report, we have 9 confirmed fatalities. There were 3 crew members on board, as Inman says, and some social media places are reporting that there were jump seaters on board as well, but I can't find anything official on that, just social media rumors. And there are casualties on the ground. At the time of writing this report, we have at least 9 confirmed fatalities, but many missing, and I fear that number might climb. The fire was huge and burned for hours. The first responders were there quickly, and many different fire departments answered the call. Huge call out to those heroes. UPS has put out a statement, and I know that the UPS family is really hurting today. I've gone over the different videos, the ones we have high confidence in, with an MD-11 pilot who flew the plane for a freight company for over a decade. This pilot describes what he saw as a nightmare scenario for the pilots. He told me after watching the takeoff video that with the left engine on fire or possibly departed, that he spots what appears to be compressor stall in the number 2 engine as shown here. Now, the FAA requires airliners to be able to take off at max gross weight, having lost 1 engine. And I asked the pilot if the MD-11 could take off at max gross weight, having lost the 1 engine. He said yes. I asked, could an MD-11 take off having lost 2 of their 3 engines? And he said, and I quote, "No way." He did say they ran drills for a second engine loss, but not at takeoff, instead coming into land or at cruise, in which case the procedure is to dump fuel to lighten the load, and basically you're a powered glider with the 1 engine remaining at that point. He believes the flight crew faced a no-win scenario, and it's too early to know for sure, and we'll wait for the investigation before drawing any conclusions. Debris litters the area, and of course, this has led to the Louisville airport to be closed. That's a lot of cleanup and a lot of debris that could have been sucked into engine number 2. Also, this dramatic footage taken from a dash cam shows the airplane impacting in that left roll. The crash left a half-mile path of fire and destruction, confirmed by the NTSB.
Cockpit voice recorder and the flight data recorder. This is what is commonly referred to as the black box. We have investigators now that have located it. As you can imagine, it's suffered some heat, not intrusion, but heat around it. These recorders are built for that. And just before we get the question, these recorders were updated from its original manufacturer. They are L3 Harris, installed at 2 different dates. We're going back and verifying that. But we feel comfortable once we get these to our lab in DC that we will be able to get a good readout of the applicable data, and that will be yet another point of information that will really help us understand what happened during this point of flight.
When I saw the first video of the airplane trying to take off with the fire engulfing the left wing, it immediately took me back to the Air France Concorde crash out of Paris de Gaulle. That crash effectively ended the Concorde. But within seconds, I also started thinking about the American Airlines crash in Chicago, Flight 191, at the time the deadliest airline crash in the U.S. And I'm seeing comments like that all over the news and social media. And one of our first investigative reports that we did was on this crash. Now, as we explain what happened in the American Airlines 191 case, I want to stress this does not mean the same thing happened here. This is for historical background, and we don't want investigators to fall into the trap of having a pet theory and then looking for clues to prove that pet theory. I talked about this in my most recent Air India update video. We want an honest investigation. Sure, look at theories, evidence, facts, even speculation, but don't run an investigation trying to prove one of those pet theories. With that in mind, let's look at AA Flight 191 from my report several years ago to get some background. American Airlines Flight 191 on May 25th, 1979, Chicago O'Hare, 271 souls aboard a McDonnell Douglas DC-10, along with 2 people on the ground, lost their lives in a fiery crash shortly after takeoff. What happened? What can we learn? Well, the DC-10 in 1979 was still new, about 8 years in service. But in that time, before Flight 191, there'd already been 3 fatal accidents involving the DC-10. Okay, before going on with Flight 191, I want to address this question. Why are we talking about a DC-10 when the UPS was an MD-11? Well, the MD-11 was basically an improved, upgraded version of the DC-10, born from the McDonnell Douglas trying to modernize and save the DC-10 design for a new era of long-haul flying. Douglas aircraft had merged with McDonnell aircraft in 1967, and so new designs, instead of DC for the Douglas Company, it became McDonnell Douglas, or MD. The DC-10 was a wide-bodied, 3-engine trijet designed to compete with the Lockheed L-1011 TriStar and to offer long-range flights without requiring the massive scale of a 4-engine Boeing 747. The DC-10 became popular quickly because it hit a sweet spot. It was large, but not giant, powerful, but not extravagant. Now back to AA-191. The wide-bodied 3-engine jet was fully loaded. 271 people. The captain and the first officer were very experienced. And like I mentioned at the top, the captain wasn't even scheduled for this trip, but was a last-minute fill-in. The pushback, the taxi, they were all normal. The tower cleared 191 for takeoff, and they began the roll. At V1, the first officer, who was the pilot flying, felt a huge jolt and lost power in the left engine. The first officer muttered, "Damn." He immediately did what they were trained to do on an engine out after rotate and continue the climb. So they slowly climbed, getting up over 300 feet. Then more trouble. The airplane banked heavily to the left, going past 100 degrees and nosed down into the terrain near a trailer park and a garage, killing everyone aboard instantly and 2 people on the ground. An amateur photographer out at O'Hare happened to be taking pictures. And here's the audio from the tower.
Look at this, look at this. Blew up an engine, equipment, new equipment, he blew an engine. Oh. Yeah, right by that guy. Right, American 191 Heavy, you want to come back into what runway? He's not talking to me. Yeah, he's going to lose a wing. There he goes, there he goes.
So the pilots didn't know that the left engine had in fact come off and over the wing. And when it did that, the power to their instruments was severed. Also, a 3-foot section of the leading edge of the wing was taken out. And worst of all, both the primary and secondary hydraulic lines were severed and the slats lost pressure and retracted on the left wing. For those that are familiar with the principle of lift, the more surface area you have, the more lift is produced, but also the more drag. So if your wing was a one-size-fits-all, it might be designed for that lift, but would not be able to go very fast. If you design for speed at altitude, then you might take longer to get airborne if you've got a one-size-fits-all. So fast planes like airliners are designed where the front of the wing can extend forward to give the wing more surface area. They call these things slats. And with the slats pushed back on the left wing because of hydraulic failure, there wouldn't have been a problem. But when the left wing lost the slats, the left wing stalled. So the plane rolled left and down. And by the way, in the 70s, the stick shaker effect that warns pilots when a plane is about to stall was an optional feature for the co-pilot. American did not purchase that option in that airplane. We'll never know what the pilots said to each other, because after the engine flew off, the electrical power to the cockpit voice recorder was generated by the left engine. As you can surmise, many systems were redesigned after this crash. And I want to stress, this flight crew did everything by the book. They did it right. And still, they and all the rest of them lost their lives. But what caused the engine to separate from the wing in the first place, which led to the cascading causes? At the American Airlines Maintenance Center in Oklahoma, this DC-10 was in for routine engine maintenance. McDonnell Douglas called for the removal of the engine to be done first with the engine and then the pylon from the wing. But American, as well as United and Continental, found out that if they keep the engine and pylon attached, they can save 200 hours. But more importantly, they said, it was for safety because they didn't have to disconnect hoses and systems and run the risk of problems reconnecting. So they drove a forklift under the engine and undid the pylon. Now the balance point for the engine was very precarious, like an egg, and had to be exact. So the crew positioned the forklift under the engine pylon assembly and undid the 2 forward pylon bolts and the 1 rear pylon bolt from the pylon's metal plates or flanges. And at that moment, the bell rang. It was time for a shift change. They walked away. The forklift hydraulics settled and the engine dropped. And as the engine dropped, it pushed the rear pylon up into the wing, which fractured the metal flange. It was this metal flange that gave way 8 weeks later, causing the engine to separate, fly up and over the left wing. And then enter the MD-11. By the mid-1980s, the DC-10 was aging, fuel costs were rising, and airlines wanted more range and lower operating costs. Major DC-10 operators like Swissair, British Caledonian, and Singapore Airlines told McDonnell Douglas, "We like the DC-10, but we need better." So instead of scrapping the design, McDonnell Douglas studied what a DC-10 for the 90s would look like. And in December 1986, McDonnell Douglas officially introduced the development of a new aircraft. At first, some called it the DC-10-60, implying it was just another variant. But the upgrades quickly became so extensive that it deserved a new identity. The name they settled on, MD-11. So what actually changed from the DC-10 to the MD-11? Well, a longer fuselage, winglets for fuel efficiency, new more efficient engines, modernization of the flight deck, which took away the need for a flight engineer, that third crew person that was required on the early models of the DC-10. This effectively extended the range and the efficiency. The first flight of the MD-11 was December 1990. But the improvement of two-engine wide bodies shortly after that pretty much killed the program, and the last one rolled out on February 22nd, 2001, just 10 or 11 years of manufacturing. Talking to MD-11 pilots, it can be a great airplane to fly, but I'm told it can be squirrely and you have to really keep on top of it. But it's been 16 years since the last major MD-11 incident, and that one had no fatalities when the freighter was landing in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. NTSB is leading the investigation, and we should expect a preliminary report from them in about 2 to 4 weeks. Board member Inman was asked about the U.S. government shutdown's effect on the NTSB staffing, and this was his response.
The shutdown occurred. I've been working every day since then. We've only recalled a few individuals yesterday just to handle some of the logistics of our travel and our movements. But we have everyone we need and then some in order to make sure we're performing this investigation.
Right now, in the immediate aftermath of this terrible crash in Louisville, I pray for the families that have been affected. It's never easy to go through such a devastating loss like this, devastating and sudden. My hope from this is that the investigation finds the cause or causes so that it will never happen again.
We have a mantra that used to be in front of our training facility, and it's from tragedy we draw knowledge to improve the safety for all.
Good words from board member Inman. Thanks for watching. We'll bring more updates when we get them. And thanks to our sponsors that make this possible, like Z-Vision, the brightest landing and taxi lights that are out there, zvision.com. I have them on my plane. A link to them and our other sponsors are in the description below. And if you haven't seen our recent update on the Air India crash, it's right here. Stay safe out there. And remember, superior judgment trumps superior skill. Take care.